Woman confessed her 10-year-old secret, then realized her husband was still in the Zoom call. Katie has no clue that what began as an average day would turn out to be so catastrophic. She understood humans make mistakes. Faults are what make us human after all. Yet with a single Zoom call, nothing could brace her for the initial surprise that followed. Katie was talking to her sister on the phone when something struck her heart. Now's the opportunity to express everything that's been burdening her for 10 years, and who's best off speaking to you than your sibling? Katie continues to stand on the phone with her sister, frozen in her tracks. She wipes a tear out of her eye, confessing the confidential information she'd hidden away for 10 years. It was a secret she'd attempted hard enough to keep tucked away. Then all of a sudden from behind, she hears something which makes her go cold. "I can still hear you." Katie turned around quickly and saw that her husband Ricky was on the Zoom call. His face had been filled with uncertainty and sorrow on the desktop. What kind of mom would have kept such a hidden truth? Katie had already been caught out well and truly. From this, there was no help. The life every lady could dream of was Katie Smith's. A nice husband named Ricky, 2 beautiful twin daughters named Molly and Megan, and a wonderful house. Sure, in her fabulous life, this lucky woman assumed nothing could go wrong. However, after a simple slip of the tongue, she had no clue her world was about to be ripped in two. She immediately fell in love once Katie first encountered Ricky 14 years ago. He was all she desired in a man. Beautiful, charming, as well as, more importantly, kind. She realized it was the one right away. And shortly enough, the two sweethearts got engaged and afterward decided to get married. Katie assumed that her life was flawless, but that was just what she really wanted. But love can make people do foolish things, right? Katie and Ricky tried to have a baby soon after getting married, and Katie did get pregnant after a month or two. But not with just one child, but 2. She came to know there's nothing else she wouldn't do for her children as quickly as she put her eyes on her 2 newborn twins, even if it really was a genuinely unfathomable thing. As unromantic as it starts to sound, it could be a very unexceptionable task to be a mom. You feel far from attractive almost all the time. That was because you're going to spend so much time exhausted, coping with a mess and always being around for your kids no matter what. Even the strongest relationship can put a huge strain on having children. Something was just below the surface of Katie and Ricky's relationship, which might tear them off from each other if anybody ever figured it out. If anyone knew Katie, she was known as a dedicated mother devoted solely to becoming the absolute best mom. This wasn't easy to juggle jobs and parenthood, and yet she handled it. But very little did everyone know that there's something this doting mother had been hiding. She'd lived a lie and had a secret that she totally had to ensure would stay secret. It did, until now. Katie was requested to work from home once the COVID-19 outbreak managed to reach their neighborhood and everyone was compelled into a hard quarantine. Right around the corner was the 10th birthday of the twin girls, and therefore this working mom was stressed out. She'd never assumed in millions of years that her ordinary Monday morning might have come to an end with such devastation and crime. When she needed it the most, in a much worse spin of good fortune, Katie's husband wasn't around to support her. Regrettably, at another house in the city, Ricky was quarantined. He'd previously been on a work trip and was self-isolated just to be sure, so Katie had been left with the twins all alone. It was yet another morning on Monday and a day of having to work for Katie from home. She remembers waking up her kids, calling her husband to greet him, settling her kids with their online classes, and afterwards her computer shift. She did think it was heading to be a normal day before having her first conference, but she was very mistaken. It was soon lunch and Katie clocked off on her shift and started taking a break from work. She gave meals to the twin girls and afterwards she video called Ricky via Zoom. She really missed her husband. On the computer monitor, she tried to touch his face, hoping he was right beside her. She has never suspected this was about to alter everything. Katie's phone started ringing. It was Laura, her sister. "My sister," she informed Ricky through the computer. "I gotta go." Ricky answered with a smile and kissed the camera. The air kiss was grabbed by Katie and placed to her heart. She said farewell, took the call, and afterward logged out of Zoom. Or so she thought. Katie and Laura, her sister, were quite close. With about 2 years of difference, the two girls were inseparable as children and adults. Everything they shared with each other. The sisters have been best buddies and they knew all the private details of one another. Laura also knew Katie's secret, the one that Laura had vowed would remain secret. Both siblings spoke over the phone talking about the TV show the other night, which they both hung upon. Shortly after, the twin girls' birthday was mentioned, with Laura validating she'd joined their digital celebration, and thereafter the brief conversation resulted in something disturbing. "With the twins turning 10, you've got to come clean," her sister stated. "You have to tell him," she told him. Katie was able to feel her fear washing over her. "It would devastate him though," she replied. And after that, "I can still hear you," said a voice from behind. Katie froze in her tracks. Her sister called her on her mobile device, but Katie was quiet. As she came to realize Ricky was still on the Zoom call, she could sense her heart in her throat, and he must have heard it all. Had she just uncovered the very secret she vowed would stay secret? Katie started to turn around and saw Ricky was on the Zoom call. His face was loaded with uncertainty and frustration on the computer monitor. Katie's stomach felt sick. She was rightly and truly caught out. Katie used to have an unfaithful relationship with a previous boyfriend 10 years ago. It was really a terrible decision, and still to this day, Katie had regret everything. It was a terrible decision, and still to this day, Katie has come to regret everything. She hasn't tried to tell Ricky, but she became pregnant a couple of weeks after her misdeed. Katie had such a nagging suspicion that perhaps the dad was her ex, not Ricky, but she couldn't really inform him about it. It would have destroyed him. She trusted her sister Laura instead, and indeed the two were appointed to secrecy. Katie used the twins as well as Ricky's DNA when the babies were born. She took the test behind Ricky's back, and the results turned her life upside down. Ricky, as anticipated, wasn't really the dad of the twin girls, and it tore the world of Katie in two. It's her own responsibility, she knew, and that she only had to keep blaming herself, but she'd never tell Ricky. She kept insisting that she and Laura would never bring it up or talk about it again. She decided to bury the hidden truth the hard as she could, but some truths don't remain laid to rest. Katie had spoken the very phrase any guy never wanted to hear while being on a mobile phone with her sister Laura. "He's not a father." And Ricky hung up on her after Katie called out, just as she was about to clarify. In her eyes, she started to feel tears. How else would she clarify with Ricky quarantined in some other house and their two children at home with her? She rang and his mobile phone rang, but he didn't pick up. Perhaps he needed time to calm down, thought Katie. Couldn't situations get much worse for sure? She was completely mistaken, however. Katie didn't hear a thing from Ricky the next day. It was as if he disappeared into nothingness. He didn't call before bed to say goodnight to the twin girls, and then just as Katie was just about to take a bath for the twins, she got a text on her mobile phone. It belonged to Ricky, and what he said left her speechless. Ricky was heartbroken, of course. He was already thinking very cautiously about continuing after the initial surprise, now that he'd found out his wife had been disloyal. He couldn't really believe that for so long she'd managed to keep the reality of the situation from him. He came to know in the end that he couldn't really handle being around her anymore. "I want a divorce," wrote Ricky. Katie began to feel her heart crumble in two as quickly as she read it. She fell to the ground, clutching her phone, realizing all she had to blame was herself. And Ricky had been fast with his decisions even after a global disease outbreak, and Katie received the divorce papers the next week. For 10 years, Katie had managed to hold on to the big fat lie. She felt nearly relieved in a sense that it had gone in the open at last. Through most of her kids' early years, she had been living in constant fear. She didn't have a single penny in the divorce settlement naturally. Ricky, however, absolutely adored his daughters and pledged to continue providing for them. He even set up a trust fund so when the chance came they could go to university. Ricky didn't preclude his relatives from embracing him overnight. Also, he needed the kids to be properly taken care of. That was the good thing about Ricky. It would be painful to lose someone and have a family for years only to hear your children aren't yours. This goes beyond upbringing, and his whole world has been turned for success. Nevertheless, he sought the courage to climb above the circumstance. It was painful for Ricky to discover that his life wasn't really his, but he understood something, that he had to live. Plus, all the affection he felt through the years for his wife and children didn't disappear overnight. No matter how complicated the choice was, he understood his children needed to be safe. At least what he was worthy of doing was safeguarding their future and offering them some help, while the rest would be with them. Ricky has done something that many in his shoes would never even attempt. Paternity fraud is where an individual is mistakenly recognized to be a child's biological father. Throughout history, this form of deception has been widespread, and it still is today. It's synonymous with adultery in most circumstances. Paternity research laboratories are very transparent with their knowledge and function, reporting a bad outcome for about 1/3 of their paternity studies. In comparison, approximately 32% of the potential dads who undergo a paternity test are not paternal fathers. Paternity theft is officially not a felony, though a man may pursue legal proceedings against a woman in order to compensate for child maintenance, and this occurs in an enormous amount of instances of paternity theft. Therefore, it's the judge's duty and sole judgment to provide the highest by the end of the day with childcare. The children and the whole family and their near circle are left with serious repercussions in every case. Mike L. from Pennsylvania saw a difficult year in 2007. In July of the same year, he went to court to announce he was no longer his daughter's parent. For 4 years, he'd been a parent only to find his baby girl wasn't his. The DNA test revelation was devastating, and it pushed him to abandon his wife. He had not, however, decided to abandon their child and even paid for childcare. All of that changed in one day. When he first discovered the truth, Mike was honest about his sentiments. He loved the little girl, and any test wouldn't delete the memories and love he had for his child. However, when he learned his ex-wife was about to marry the man who was the girl's biological father, Mike decided to take drastic action. Supporting the child of another man was not a choice for him anymore. His fight lasted 2 years and he was finally free from child support, but the love he has for his daughter will never vanish, even if it was declared he was no longer the father. Mike is free in terms of income, but his daughter's always clear to him. He never intended to put her behind or in any way not provide for her. Any other weekend, an 11-year-old girl stays in Mike's quiet suburban home. Her room's furnished to encourage her current interests, so a soccer bedspread, soccer curtains, and a soccer ball nightlight are needed in her room. To her, Mike is daddy. Fraud from paternity is a dangerous thing. Someone's heart may be shattered, and certain persons can respond heavily to the effects of DNA. In certain cases like Mike's, though, it's not just about the DNA outcomes, but what they feel in their hearts and minds. In certain instances, women are left behind and they're no longer able to trust them by fellows. Even men don't have childcare in the majority of situations. For instance, one father is still battling a court in Florida. Joseph Sivnawa has been battling a long fight against the state of Florida. Despite a DNA test showing he's not the paternal parent, he's being pressured to pay for childcare. When Joseph signed the birth certificate, he had no clue that it wasn't his biological daughter. It's seen through a DNA test that he's not the father, but that he also has to compensate for childcare. Many people believe the judge's verdict is incorrect, but Joseph still has to pay for it. For more than 16 years, St. Augustine attorney Brandon Beersley has been working out family law. You're just making a father pay child support every month now for an extended period of time, which he shouldn't pay until he follows those procedures, he added. The issue with the Revenue Department is that their client is the state, not the mother. Joseph's ex-wife is not involved in child benefits. Although she communicates frankly about it, so far it hasn't improved much. Some people also struggle to grasp that Joseph has to avoid paying for childcare, or why the judges request this intervention. He has paperwork, after all, showing he's not the parent. He brought an appeal against the court's ruling and is now awaiting the final decision. No one knows what's going to happen. These are all difficult decisions, and we're glad that some people take decisions that are the most important for their children. Though it's difficult to learn that you might not be the father through a DNA test, it's important that you look into your heart and mind and find the answer there.